Welcome to the Panther Planet podcast. This is a conversational series which explores how international traditions, cultures, and experience impact one's identity as a local and global citizen. This season, Alex and Chris are going to show you how our interconnected world is smaller than we think, and despite our differences, the human experience is universal. And today we are talking about global fashion, part 2. Take it away, Chris.
Yeah, as we were talking in part 1, we spoke a lot about fashion across different countries around the world, as well as some of the downsides and plus sides to fast fashion. But now we're going to talk about the opposite of fast fashion. We're going to be talking about slow fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So, slow fashion has emerged as a sustainable alternative to the fast fashion industry, which is known for its rapid production of style, cycles in production, cheap labor, and environmental impacts. And also for stealing ideas from other smaller designers, which I guess we'll get into a little bit later. But it is known that in ethical production, slow fashion emphasizes fair wages, safe working conditions, and artisanal craftsmanship. It promotes transparency in the supply chain, ensuring that workers are treated equally, which is something very important, at least as we were talking earlier about Ghana and the whole fashion industry that is emerging there in their production. Also, slow fashion takes into account quality over quantity. Slow fashion focuses on creating durable and timeless pieces that are meant to last. Garments are made from high quality materials and often involve traditional or artisanal techniques which contribute to their longevity, which is complete. It's a dream that I don't think fast fashion could ever come close to.
Yeah.
Environmental sustainability. The slow fashion movement encourages environmentally friendly practices. This includes using eco-friendly materials like organic cotton, bamboo, etc., reducing waste through recycling and upcycling, and minimizing carbon footprints in production and transportation. We reduce consumption, unlike fast fashion, which encourages frequent purchasing of cheaply made clothes. Slow fashion promotes a minimalist approach to consumption. It encourages consumers to buy less but invest in higher quality pieces that align with their own personal style and values. Also, it is local and independent brands. Slow fashion often support local artisans and small-scale producers, which fast fashion does not do. This not only helps the preserving traditional craftsmanship, but also reduces the carbon footprint associated with global transportation. And also, we're educating consumers. The movement aims to raise awareness among consumers about the impact of fast fashion and empower them to make informed choices. This includes understanding the true cost of cheap clothing and the benefits of supporting ethical and sustainable fashion brands. And overall, I think that slow fashion represents a shift towards a more thoughtful and sustainable practices in the fashion industry, and it promotes a deeper connection between consumers and their clothing, encouraging a more conscious approach to personal style and consumption habits. Um, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like, I mean, it's not even just about being environmentally conscious, but it's also like, it's like it benefits you, like the consumer, because when you invest in slower fashion, when you invest in your clothing, it's like it's like an investment into your future, because you could have the same pair of jeans for 5 years, or you could have a pair of jeans from Shein for a year or a year and a half. It's very much like an investment in your style and your clothing, in things that last a long time and you're able to reuse. And I think it's important to also just highlight that, because it's like it's not just benefiting the overall environment, the community, it's also benefiting you.
And if that is not convincing enough,
Mm-hmm.
you just don't look tacky and cheap.
True.
Yeah, that helps. If that helps, I mean.
I mean, not to
Um,
not to
but
be controversial here.
that might be controversial. Hot topic here. You know how we are. But within all this environmental and consumerism practices that we see in fast fashion, how they are these are problems that slow fashion takes care of. And instead of just thinking of I need the next hot thing to come out and like I need it fast and I need it to the cheapest price, yes, slow fashion it's a little bit more expensive. Well, it's more expensive, but we're making sure that you have quality pieces that will last you for a long time. Also, unique pieces, because I think it is very important for us to understand that at the rate in which the fashion industry is working today, fashion houses normally have 4 collections in a year.
Mm-hmm.
That is less than 3 months for a designer and their craftsmen to come up with an entire new collection. And that, first of all, doesn't give them time to be inspired to create a new thing. And that, I think, is why in the last decade we have started to see a bunch of collections that look the same. They
Mm-hmm.
just change different things. And it's because we're not giving designers time to like get inspired and create new
Mm-hmm.
things, because they're constantly going fast to create the next new
Right.
thing. And in slow fashion, we take care of that problem, minimizing those fashion collections to 2 collections a year, which gives plenty of time for designers to create and to like let the inspiration flow through them and like do the thing that they're good at. At the same time, it also it gives us more time to actually think, do I really like this style? Like, does this suit me? Like, it gives us time to make the right decision on the things that we want.
Mm-hmm.
And once we get to buy those things and wear those things, first we know that we actually like it. And also we know that it's going to last us for a very long time. And outside of that, we are helping the environment. We are creating new jobs. We are creating a bunch of good things through the economy and to the environment just through the slow fashion movement.
Definitely. And I was like thinking about what you said about how like fashion houses are just so like overwhelmed in a
Mm-hmm.
way and just producing things that look so much alike, and it just reminded me of how much today's trends are just recycled trends of like 20 years ago. Like
Mm-hmm.
and we all know that, and it's nothing unique, it's nothing different. And not saying that every trend has to be something completely like out of the blue, like something that we don't like has never existed before, but it's very much become more so like a thing for like, oh, the 90s trends are coming back or the 80s trends are coming back. It's like,
They're
why
running
don't
out
we
of juice.
exactly, like what are the trends of today though? Like
Yes.
what are things that are going to people are going to look back in 10, 20 years and be like, this is what people wore in the 2020s.
Correct, because I think that before fast fashion became such an overwhelming phenomenon um, in our society, we had different decades that had a very specific look and silhouette and aesthetic to it, if you
Mm-hmm.
want to call it that. Um, and like we can see someone wearing a specific clothing from a certain decade, and we know what decade
Yeah.
that is, because that is very distinctive of that time. But for us, I think the last big uh, decade that we can like pinpoint would be the 90s and maybe the 2000s before the 2010s. From the
Definitely.
2010s upward, we haven't had a very specific style or silhouette, because we're like almost bi-weekly getting new styles or
Mm-hmm.
things, new trends just coming out from left and right. And there's no time for people to like actually feel, do I like this? Is this like something for me? Or is this just something that's gonna change in the next couple of days? It's just
Mm-hmm.
an uninspirational mess.
Definitely. And it's like you look at those clothing pieces that just keep coming out, like all the trends, and it's like at first you're like, oh my god, this is so cute, and you're like instantly want to buy it, but then it just sits in your closet.
Yeah, and then when we do this, we have things like skinny jeans coming back or low rise jeans, and like, please, please don't let that come back. I beg of you,
I know.
listener, don't let that come back.
Yeah.
Which is why, through slow fashion, we also take into account a very important part, which is personal style. Um, and this brings us to, is personal style a dying concept or is it going through a revival? And I really hope it's the latter. Um, latter from it's going through a revival. I hope that is that
I
it?
always get those two confused, latter and
For-
former.
Yeah, I hope it's the latter.
There
I
we
hope
go.
that we are going through a revival of
Okay.
personal style. Sorry, I'm multilingual. um, that was so cringy. Okay, so personal style. It is definitely not dying out. If anything, it is experiencing a revival in recent years. And here's why: diversity and individuality. In today's fashion landscape, there is a growing emphasis on diversity and individuality. Social media platforms and online communities have provided a platform for people to express and showcase their unique personal style, and this has created a more inclusive environment where different tastes and aesthetics are celebrated.
Hmm.
Also, vintage and thrift culture is at an all-time high.
Definitely, yeah.
The popularity of vintage and thrift shopping has contributed to the resurgence of personal style. Many people are mixing vintage pieces with modern items to create eclectic and personalized looks. This trend promotes creativity and allows individuals to experiment with their fashion choices.
Hmm.
And I am a fashion victim from time to time, and having the opportunity to have vintage and thrift pieces that have
Hmm.
their own little stories, but at the same time they are well made and they are gorgeous. Um, I don't know. It makes me like appreciate the piece
Hmm.
that much more.
Definitely. There's more meaning behind
Mm-hmm.
it. And I also think it's important to note that, like, even when you thrift, like, sometimes you don't find, like, a designer brand. Sometimes there are, like, you do find, like, fast fashion brands in thrift stores,
Mm-hmm.
but you're still recycling them. You know, you're still, if you purchase them, you're still, like, you know, still contributing to that recycling process of clothing.
Yeah, and at the same time, even if you don't find fast fashion or like high brand pieces, you find small brands, but you find like interesting pieces that are not mainstream because they're a small brand. And I think thrift shops are the great equalizer into the fashion industry
Hmm.
because everyone gets the same opportunity to just go in there and like um their work will get a second opportunity to finding a home,
Definitely.
just like a puppy. And then personal style is very important to the slow fashion movement. Um, the slow fashion movement is encourage consumers to invest in quality pieces that reflect their personal values and style preferences. Um, this shift away from fast fashion, the cookie cutter approach has empowered individuals to create wardrobes that truly resonate with their identities. Um, so because it is true that we have been seeing that because of these trends, a lot of people are starting to look the same because everyone
Hmm.
wants to wear what's trendy, and through slow fashion, not only are we given time to people to buy like newer pieces that are newly inspired and newly created and are like very unique to them, but also when you go thrifting, you get pieces from the past who are also unique and interesting, and you choose them because you like them and because they speak to you and
Hmm.
your style, and not just because it's the new trendy thing.
Exactly. Like, I mean, like, I can't even count how many times I've asked someone, like, oh my God, where did you get that? And they say, the thrift store. And then it's just like, okay, that's something that's uniquely them. That's something that, you know, you can't really, like, find anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, that's a little bit of a downer for me,
True.
but it's like, it showcases, like, how powerful that is and, like, um, creating, like, like, cultivating this personal style.
And I
Hmm.
think that having your personal style come to a level in which someone can only see like some pieces of clothing and say, "Oh, this reminds me of so and so,"
Hmm.
or like, "Oh, this is so and so's person." Not even seeing your face, it's just because the way you dress.
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I was the other day at a thrift shop, and I went into the jewelry section, and the amount of beautiful pieces of jewelry that I saw there at such cheap prices was
Mm-hmm.
outstanding. The amount of brooches and necklaces and rings and hair pieces were out of this world. And for such cheap prices, and I
Mm-hmm.
know that if I were to buy some of those pieces, nobody else would have them.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be something like ideal to me, like very
Yeah.
specific to me. At the same time, not only just buying something from like a thrift shop and just using it as it is, with slow fashion we get the opportunity to customize and make our own DIY trends. With the rise of customization options and DIY fashion trends, individuals have more opportunities to personalize their clothing and accessories. Whether it's customizing a basic item with patches or embroidery, or designing bespoke pieces, these activities promote self expression through fashion. But then, we have celebrity and influencers influence. Celebrities and influencers often set the trends, but they also inspire individuals to interpret those trends in their own unique ways. This influence has broadened the definition of personal style and encouraged experimentation across different fashion genres. And of course, a very important one is the sustainability and conscious consumerism through slow fashion. Increasing awareness of environmental issues has led many consumers to rethink their shopping habits. As a result, there is a growing interest in sustainable fashion brands that prioritize quality, longevity, and timelessness um, into the styles over fleeting trends. These aligns with concepts of personal style as an enduring expression rather than a passing trend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's just so, it's so important to just like, because I feel like there's just so much with, especially like micro trends now, and like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much noise in like the fashion industry. There's so much like, so like what's trendy, what's not trendy, and like it can feel so overwhelming, I think. Like, and just, I don't know, like cultivating your own style and being able to actually invest in clothing pieces that you know are made in like um fairly, like by people that are treated fairly, and who aren't overworked and underpaid. It's like, I think it's really like, it's important to think about where you're getting all these things, where they're coming from. And I think soul fashion is just so important in that way.
Yeah, it really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as we were talking with traditional fashions
Mm-hmm.
across the world, they are also sending messages and like they tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see why modern fashion wouldn't be the same. Every single day that we go out into the streets with whatever it is that we're wearing, we are sending a message.
Mm-hmm.
We are expressing ourselves and being more conscious of that and like utilizing that in our favor. I think it's a beautiful thing because language is more than just verbal and written, it's also visual. And just creating a beautiful world in which people have their own ideas and get to express them into the way in which they dress. Um, I think that would be a very beautiful world to
Mm-hmm.
see.
Yeah, and I think like touching on like these traditional clothing items we see, it's, they have stayed through like centuries. Like
Mm-hmm.
they have, obviously they've changed like different, the type of material they're made out of or things like that, or like how they're worn or where they're worn has transformed over time, but those clothing items have still stayed in our minds, and like we can still identify like what cultures would wear this certain garment. Like if it was a kilt, we know it, like, oh, Scotland, or like we think of these specific cultures when we look at specific items, and it's like, shouldn't we have like items like that today? Like shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
there be things like that are occurring now that like they'll look back on in like 100 years and be like, this is like very much so and so's culture,
Yeah.
things like that.
I'm thinking, what would that be for America?
A Lululemon, little the little thing that goes around. What is that called? Fanny pack.
The fanny pack.
Someone's
And
gonna find that in a landfill, like in 100 years.
And probably like a cowboy hat. Yeah, I wonder what our traditional American clothing would look like in the future.
Or it's gonna be the masks. Like,
The
you know how that
mask.
was such like a thing, during COVID. I feel like it's like, oh, like in 100 years, someone's gonna find this mask and be like, wow, that was
Wow.
the
They survived the
2020s.
plague. The Great
Yeah, the
Plague.
plague.
I mean, this is gonna be a fun story to tell in the future,
Mm-hmm.
but also to know that our fashion is also influenced by the situations that are going around us. And I think that during the pandemic, we were very much like just in sweatpants.
Oh
For
yeah,
years.
definitely.
And at the same time, the fact that once we made it out of the home, we wanted to like cut ties with anything that brought us back to that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's exactly when our fashion in the United States changed completely. Because now, when I look around, especially here in Milwaukee, yes, of course, there's still people who wear like sweatpants and stuff like that,
Mhm.
but a lot of people have their own personal style and have started to like just have this aesthetic of their own
Mm-hmm.
because they want to express themselves in a way in which those 2-3 years of the pandemic they couldn't. And I think that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, it's like you just see this shift in like wanting to look good because like you couldn't really for a while. And I mean, it is really interesting to see like, because like I guess yeah, like people want it to be like, when you're so limited in what you can do and you're finally free to do what you want to do, it's like you want to express yourself more.
Yes.
And like, yeah, like people haven't seen you in years, and like you can almost like create a new identity for yourself in that way, because
Exactly.
like so many people were like switching jobs, or they went from high school to college, or like these big life transitions happened during the pandemic, and that really changes who you are as a person, and then evidently that'll change like what you look like.
True. And I think that brings me to a very interesting question. What do you think is your personal style?
That's something that's so hard for me. I feel like the thing is,
Or what inspires you whenever like you look around and
Yeah.
the thing that you like and like I like this and this. What's that?
it's really, I think a lot for me is colors. Is something I've noticed as I've gotten older too, is that I gravitate towards like very specific, like I gravitate towards like white, blue, and like sometimes red. And I think that's really interesting because I can see like there's a lot of, like not a lot, but I have a few clothes in my closet where I'm like, this is lime green. This doesn't look good on me. Like, it's like, I feel like there's been like this switch of like, I've kind of like started to more so look at like how do things like look on me, and like how do they complement my skin tone or my hair color, my eye color. And like, I think that has definitely, that has shifted my clothing, like how I express myself in my clothing, because it's just definitely like different colors. And like obviously like I gravitate towards crop tops because I'm shorter, and so like, or high-waisted jeans and things like that. Like those are things I gravitate towards more so because of like how they fit my silhouette and how they look on me, just like when I'm tan versus when I'm pale, like, and all of these like other like kind of like mini things.
Yeah. I think in my case, I think that I'm quite eclectic sometimes. I go through seasons. Recently, since I just came back from Florida, I'm very much into wearing more cropped pieces without sleeves, more like fresh, to show off the tan, and like high-waisted jeans and stuff like that. But I think that overall, since Wisconsin is like 80% winter,
True.
I tend to go for like more layered looks. And I really much like way more structured silhouettes. Like I would tend to go for jackets that are way more structured, like that have a belt to make a waist, very like jewel tones in colors and stuff like that. Some would say that I have a very old grandma style, and I can see that happen. But it's beautiful, I think.
And you know, it's like when you get older, you realize more so what you like and what you don't like. I
Yeah.
think like when you're younger, it's like you follow trends more because it's like that's what's easy. And I think like social media exposure is now just like so young, where it's like it's so easy to grasp on to what's popular, what's not.
Yeah.
But it's like when you get older, you kind of like are able more so to see what complements you and what you like.
Yeah, what makes you feel the best.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep jumping from time to time. Like, I'll jump from aesthetic to aesthetic. Like, I remember at the end of high school, I was very much into dark academia.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I wasn't living in Wisconsin. At the time, I was living in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine me layering vests and like long sleeve shirts and like trench coats in Florida heat. That
That
wasn't
sounds
pretty.
like a nightmare, dude.
It was. It lasted for like a month, and I was like, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Give me shorts and like a t-shirt,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a blazer if I'm feeling fancy, but that's it. So I was really pleased when I came back, and I was like, oh, I can layer clothes now. But by the
Mm-hmm.
time Dark Academia was through
Was
the window,
it? It was.
Yeah.
It was what you were
but
going for.
but I think that Milwaukee is a very great example of like a city that has many different cultures into it.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, through the time that I've been able to live here, I've had the opportunity to meet different people from different countries and different backgrounds and all those sort of things that inspire me. And they sometimes come and give me a piece from their own culture, and like a pattern or a color or something like that. Like mixing those things together into a beautiful thing that represents where I've come from, or where I am, and where I'm going. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
But now, we're moving to the fun part of this episode. We're gonna talk drama, and we're gonna
Yeah.
talk influences and like contributions
Mm-hmm.
of the fashion industry into modern culture. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, definitely. So I was very interested in looking into like Coco Chanel and Christian Dior because I haven't seen it yet, but there is an Apple original series now out about them. It's called The New Look, I believe, and I just think it's really interesting that they made like a whole series about them, and a lot of articles were going around about like what's actually the backstory behind these people, and like why are they so important to the industry, but also like why are they interesting people in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So Coco Chanel, I did a little digging on her, and she has quite the backstory, let's just
Have
say.
a little dirt.
There's a lot of it. Her life itself is just very, very interesting and very like, how did you become who you are? A little bit. Because she was an orphan. She was raised in a nunnery when her mom died, and her father abandoned her. But when she got older, she actually really refused. She denied that this was her life. You know, she denied her poor childhood, and she even paid off her brothers so they wouldn't expose like her life while she was alive. Obviously, now we know what her life was like. And she was a very controversial figure, to put it lightly. She was acknowledged as a member of the French resistance during World War II, but she also collaborated with Nazis. Yeah. So she had an affair with a Nazi. His name was Hans Gunther von Dinklage.
Pardon our German.
Yes. And so, but there is like something very interesting to that, because she used her connections to the Nazis to get her nephew, who was a French soldier, out of a prison camp. So it's like she had this affair, but was there some ulterior motive to it?
Mm-hmm.
But she was involved in Operation Model Hut, which was a mission organized by the Nazis for Chanel to meet Winston Churchill in a neutral Madrid to arrange a ceasefire deal, unbeknownst to Hitler at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting to see, like, there's just so much going on in her background, and she's very much a double agent.
Yeah.
However, she also tried to use the German Aryan laws, which were ensured that Jews cannot own companies, to gain sole control of the Chanel company, because the co-owners were Jewish.
Didn't work out for her at the end, though.
No. And so these owners they were the ones funding her perfume Chanel No. 5. This was unsuccessful though because they had already transferred the rights of the company to someone who was non-Jewish.
Yeah.
So that did not work out for her. In the end, funnily enough though, they still reinvested in Chanel's brand after she reopened after World War II. Even after their her attempts to evict them from the company, which I thought was very intriguing, and I feel like there's not a lot of information about like how that came to be, but like how exactly did they reconcile in a way?
Yeah, things like that makes us wish that we had like the diaries of
Yeah,
Coco Chanel
exactly.
telling us like what was actually going through her mind and like what was happening.
Yeah, definitely. It makes you think like what is going through a person's head when they make these decisions, and like what happens behind closed doors that never comes out, because like sometimes, because it never will, like and it's very interesting to think about, like just like she was still able to get back on top right after World War II. And her company is still such a big influence today. However, there's also, I'm not sure if this is 100% true, but it was believed that Chanel's house on the Riviera was a place for Jews to flee France during the occupation. But there isn't a lot of legitimate evidence behind this. However, so that could be a possible rumor. Is it true? Is it not? And I thought something that was interesting was that during the war, she actually closed her fashion house, and Christian Dior did not. Which I thought, I was kind of confused why he wouldn't. I mean, I think there was the argument that like he still had people working for him, and so he still wanted to like be able to like employ them. But
unlike Armani, who started creating the uniforms for the high officials.
Yes. But the French archives did release a list, and Coco Chanel was labeled a resistance member and a Nazi collaborator. So she was pretty much a double agent. She was arrested by the French police, but she was never prosecuted because of her connections to Churchill. She had very high up connections to people in the UK and France and things like that, which allowed her to remain free, obviously. So it's very confusing and complicated, I feel like, is the only way to describe her backstory. Like like you don't know what she was thinking as a person, like what, obviously this is a very like difficult time in history, and she was a very popular figurehead, but it's like, why get so involved in the war itself? I don't know.
Yeah, and then that's not her only drama, because then she had the infamous rivalry between Coco Chanel and Elsa Schiaparelli. Because we don't remember, we weren't alive, but like
True.
History remembers their creative clashes, because Chanel and Schiaparelli were known for their intense rivalry during the 1930s. Chanel dismissed Schiaparelli's surrealist designs as mere costumes, while Schiaparelli considered Chanel designs too conservative. Also, Chanel made some personal attacks, reportedly referring to Elsa Schiaparelli as the Italian artist who makes clothes, and mocked her work publicly. So she was controversial, to say the least.
She lashed back.
Yeah.
Publicly. That's very
Chanel-like.
Yes, and and it's very insane. Like, I mean, but she stayed on top. Like, her brand is still very much prevalent today.
Because there are some good things about Chanel. Her innovation, through this rivalry, there was a lot of innovation through competition. The rivalry pushed both designers to innovate and elevate their work, ultimately benefiting the fashion industry, and they created their own distinct styles. Chanel's minimalist contrasted with the sharply of Schiaparelli's bold, surrealistic, offering diverse choices for fashion enthusiasts, which I think was very interesting as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, and I think also, like, during the time period of Coco Chanel, there was Christian Dior.
Mm-hmm.
And he really changed the fashion industry itself. Like after World War II, he had a very ultra feminine collection,
Mm-hmm.
low hemline, cinch waist, full skirt. And it was very much the opposite of what the wartime look was.
Yes.
And he called this collection the New Look. And it's still very much like prevalent today, that those types of silhouettes and those types of styles. But what I think is really interesting about him is that we all know his perfume, Miss Dior.
Mm-hmm.
That was named after his sister, Catherine Dior, and it was inspired by her story, which was that she was actually a French resistance fighter during World War II, and she was taken and tortured in a concentration camp, but she actually survived. So this very iconic perfume has a very heavy meaning to it, which I thought was very interesting and very like, it's very cool that it's still something we use today, but a lot of people just don't know about that.
Yeah, and Miss Dior paved the way for Dior, which is now I think about to be, well, in the last couple of years, the number one perfume for weddings. And like it's a fragrance that has accompanied so many brides into their new marriage, and it's become part of so many people's lives. So they speak to a higher more than just, oh, it smells nice, it speaks to memories and like forming parts of people's histories.
Definitely.
Then we have more drama.
What's the drama?
We have Gianni Versace and Giorgio Armani. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, Armani dresses the wife, but Versace dresses the mistress.
I've never heard that before.
In the fashion community, this is a very well-known phrase, because, well, if you see the aesthetics of both fashion houses, Armani is a little bit more, well, we're way more conservative, elegant, refined. Tends to be the fashion brand that husbands would buy for their wives, in the peak of Armani. But then Versace is way more like leathers and like vibrant colors, patterns, very, some would say skimpy almost. Typically the type of brand that husbands would buy for their mistresses. It's a whole story of those brands together, but the rivalry started with Publix Pets, Versace, and Armani had a notable rivalry between 1980s to 1990s, often making some light remarks about each other's designs. Versace accusing Armani of being too safe and boring, the wife, while Armani criticized Versace flamboyant styles, the mistress. Fashion Week tensions, their shows during Milan Fashion Week were often scheduled back to back, intensifying their rivalry. But something good that came from it is the diverse aesthetic. The rivalry highlighted the contrast between Versace's opulence and Armani's understated elegance, broadening the fashion spectrum, and it elevated Milan because up until that point, Paris was the number one fashion capital of the world, but this brought Milan into the picture way more so. The competition helped elevate Milan as a global fashion capital, attracting international attention.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, is this still like something that's seen today, this competition, or is this something that was more so like when the brands were both starting out?
Considering that both of them are dead, and it was like a personal.
Oh, it was a personal
rivalry
rivalry, so it wasn't like the fashion houses themselves.
It started as personal, then they attacked each other's work because, keep it classy, attack their work, not the person, right? And then Armani saying, you're too opulent, too extravagant, and then Versace saying, you're just plain too safe, which is from where that phrase of, you dress the wife, I dress the mistress comes from. But now the brands are more in amicable terms. They have their own lanes. Of course, Versace has their very distinctive aesthetic, and Armani have their own. But yeah, I don't think it's a rivalry that's still to this day. It's just something of the past, something that they would laugh to now.
True. That is very interesting.
Hmm.
It's very interesting how like rivalries were a lot of competition really is what
Hmm.
makes like something new.
Yeah, we saw it with Schiaparelli and Chanel. We see it with Versace and Armani. The fact that they had to compete with each other and they were so different from each other, it created such a broad spectrum of what fashion was at the time. And it just, people love gossip.
Oh yeah.
And if you get to become part of the gossip by
Mm-hmm.
buying from this brand and not the other,
Mm-hmm.
like, if the phrase of "you dress the wife, I dress the mistress" was so well known during the 80s and 90s, you could almost send a message depending on from which brand you bought
Mm-hmm.
clothing from.
Definitely.
So that's a whole thing. But this paves the way to people like Yves Saint Laurent and Karl Lagerfeld, later on working for Chanel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in their early beginnings, both designers started their careers at the same time and were often compared. Their rivalry intensified when Lagerfeld took over Chanel, a position many thought would go to Saint Laurent, who at the
Mm-hmm.
time was the youngest uh, designer to ever become um, to have his own fashion house and be a fashion designer. He was the youngest at the time.
Wow.
Now that title has gone to, I believe, um, Olivier Rousteing, who's the designer of Balmain. Um, just by 2 years, Olivier was 2 years younger when he took over. But everyone thought that uh, Saint Laurent would take over Chanel, but then Karl Lagerfeld did. And then public and personal attack, Saint Laurent's partner Pierre Berger, Berger, we'll call it, pardon our French, uh,
Yes.
often publicly disparaged Lagerfeld, adding a personal dimension to the rivalry. So we really don't know what was it that like made things explode.
Yeah.
But if we're bringing our boyfriends into this, yeah,
There's a lot of bad blood.
yeah.
Um.
But at the same time, if we think like when the rivalry was happening, that those were the golden ages of those fashion houses.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that had not happened, Yves Saint Laurent would never have created his own fashion house, and Karl Lagerfeld would never have created the legacy that he had in Chanel.
Mm-hmm. It brings those brands into the spotlight more so, and like
Yeah.
because of their rivalry, like people know who they are, like
Hmm.
they're invested in it.
And again, we keep expanding and broadening the spectrum of fashion
Mm-hmm.
with, again, John Galliano and Alexander McQueen did. Um, they were both emerging talents. They were considered the infants, the infant turbos of fashion in the 90s. With each, they were fighting for the title of the most innovative designer, um, which at the time brought them into tricky territory from time to time. Especially, I believe it was 2015's collection of John Galliano, where he had plenty of, he called air quotes, inspiration from Asian cultures, but
Mm-hmm.
of course it played into a lot of these stereotypes of the time. Now, of course, there's been a rectification of those mistakes of the past
Mm-hmm.
with new collections and stuff like that. But at the time, it didn't help him a lot
Yeah.
with the rivalry, and it was a whole thing. But thanks to these things, then again, Dior and Givenchy had rivalry because of John Galliano and Alexander McQueen. The rivalry peaked when Galliano was Dior and McQueen at Givenchy, two of the most prestigious fashion houses. Which again, it becomes a pattern because when their rivalries at the most um,
Like heated
heated,
almost.
and they take over these old, almost decadent fashion houses,
Mm-hmm.
that heat of their argument or whatever it is
Yeah.
intensifies and creates
Yeah.
these new things.
Right. The fire fuels
Yes.
inspiration.
But they have good impact into the fashion industry. They brought boundary pushing designs. McQueen and Galliano have always been known for pushing the boundaries in that aspect. The competition led to some of the most avant-garde and theatrical runway shows in fashion history, because sometimes you could like start to fall asleep in a fashion show because it's continually the same thing and like it gets boring. It really gets boring. But in Galliano's and Galliano's and McQueen's careers, they made a spectacle out of their shows in which you were always expecting what's coming next. And that made, at least during those years, the golden age of fashion in the United States, because of their designs and their shows. And they have a bunch of legacy and innovation. Both left a lasting legacy of daring and creativity that continues to inspire designers today, including Galliano himself, who's still alive and creating his own collections to this day. Then we have very dapper Tom Ford and Domenico Dolce and Stefano Gabbana, so the designers of Dolce & Gabbana. Of course, full of drama, both sides.
What's new?
Yeah, and there's a lot of dirt. But back when Tom Ford was in Gucci, and in the beginnings of Dolce & Gabbana, in the late 90s, early 2000s, Tom Ford worked at Gucci often clashed with the aesthetic of Dolce & Gabbana. The rivalry was marked by contrasting styles and competitive campaigns. And of course, again, designers tend to go for personal attacks, and there were reports of personal dabs and criticism exchanged between Ford and the duo, amplifying the competitive tensions. But again, once more, they created distinctive aesthetics. The rivalry emphasized the distinctive identities of each brand, with Gucci's slick modernism juxtaposed against Dolce & Gabbana's Baroque romanticism, which I love that era of Dolce & Gabbana. And also market dynamics. The competition helped define the luxury fashion market for the era, driving innovation and brand differentiation.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I feel like all of these competitions have just like fueled new designs, and they fueled like new styles which became so prevalent in that time period, and that is what makes that decade or so memorable, because of those specific feuds really fueling the fire of new designs. And even though they got dirty, it really did help like invigorate the fashion industry.
Yes. But from the little thing that they could all agree on was the distinct separation between Pret-a-Porter, which was ready to wear, and haute couture. They all were very keen on making that separation, because to be considered a fashion house that is a craftsman's into haute couture, there's some requirements, very specific requirement into what you have to do, and they loved making that decision because it felt almost elitist in a sense of making like fashion almost out of reach for the common people, which is why they created the rules of what haute couture was. To be considered a haute couture house, you needed to have an atelier in Paris. The designs needed to be made by hand, no machinery. Everything is done by craftsmen. And you needed to have specific collections coming out in specific times. And there's a list. You can look up the list.
Is that still like a thing today?
It is still a thing today. You cannot call yourself a haute couture house if you do not fulfill those requirements, which is why...
So it's like very elitist.
It's very elitist almost, because a bunch of fashion houses from American brands and like Asian brands cannot fit into that category just simply because they don't fit those requirements because they're not European, they're not from France.
Yeah.
Which has brought many of them to bring their own brands into France, and also try to fulfill those requirements. And we have started to see some new designers who are working endlessly to provide a new perspective into fashion that is not very Eurocentric. Because at the end of the day, most of the designers that we have spoken about are European or American, Americans that live in Europe most of the time. And there is more to fashion than just these two sides.
Yeah.
There's plenty more, and we really do hope that there's more designers like Peter Do or Yokomo Yamamoto who are creating beautiful pieces and beautiful works that have beautiful meanings into the fashion industry, and that hopefully they soon shall become mainstream and showcase their work and their culture to the entire world.
Definitely. I think it's like even seeing like the fashion scene in Korea or Ghana, you see like how like there's all of these like K-pop, for instance, or these sustainable brands coming out of Ghana. Like there's really thriving fashion markets there, like, and they are going to continue to thrive and hopefully have a much more global influence. But I think you really see today like how the fashion industry is expanding and changing and isn't just like in Europe or in America anymore. It's like it is spreading throughout the world.
Yes. I think that's the beautiful thing about fashion.
Definitely, I agree.
I'm very interested and very intrigued into seeing what will come next in the fashion world. As a lot of more people are creating they have their own visions of what fashion is and what it should look like and how it should make you feel. It's gonna be, I trust that in the next couple of years, this world would look very different than it does now, and it's gonna be very interesting.
Definitely. And I think especially with like the reach of social media and like the internet, it's like we will be able to highlight more cultures and countries with a diverse array of styles and bring those brands to light and make them much more like known and popular.
True.
All right.
Well, that was all for episode on all things fashion.
Part 2.
Part 2. Hope you liked it, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.